seminar called From Cicero to Obama, The Art of Mastering Argumentation in Your Essays. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Riddell. I'm a professor in the English department, and I'm here today to discuss the genre of the essay. Many of you might ask why you have to write essays in the first place, why it's a core component in classes that don't even seem to be related to English literature. So you'll have to write an essay in sociology, or in business, or in some other discipline. What is the value of mastering the art of an essay? And I'm going to spend the rest of this hour reassuring you that mastering the art of essay writing will not only help you in your classes, but it'll also help you in the real world, in whatever field that you decide to choose. I'm going to start off with a little game, and it's an exercise where I'm going to read 3 famous speeches, and I'd like you to guess who the orators are. I'd also like you to think, as I read them, what makes these speeches so special? What makes them so famous? What kinds of strategies are being used in this form of argumentation? So the first one, my loving people, we have been persuaded by some that are careful of our safety to take heed how we commit ourselves to armed multitudes for fear of treachery. But I assure you, I do not desire to live to distrust my faithful and loving people. I know I have but the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart of a king and a king of England too, and think foul scorn on Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm, to which, rather than any dishonor should grow by me, I myself will take up arms. I myself will be your general, judge, and rewarder of every one of your virtues in the field. Anybody want to guess who that famous orator is? Maddie? Elizabeth I. She is giving this speech to her troops at the Battle of Tilbury as the Spanish Armada is in her sights. She is rallying her troops to defend the shores of England, and she uses this really persuasive and beautiful speech to galvanize her men's support for not only her authority, but for the battle that lies ahead. I'm going to give you a second example. Mr. Moderator, Brother Lomax, brothers and sisters, friends and enemies. I just can't believe everyone here is a friend, and I don't want to leave anybody out. The question tonight, as I understand it, is the Negro Revolt, and where do we go from here? Or what next? In my little humble way of understanding it, it points towards either the ballot or the bullet. Malcolm X delivered this speech on April the 3rd, 1963. He was a very important human rights activist, and he had the mastery of argumentation and oration. I'm going to give you one more. This might be a little closer to home for you all. My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you have bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. I thank President Bush for his service to our nation, as well as the generosity and cooperation he has shown throughout this transition. 44 Americans have now taken the presidential oath. The words have been spoken during rising tides of prosperity and still waters of peace. Yet, every so often, the oath is taken amidst gathering clouds and raging storms. At these moments, America has carried on not simply because of the skill or vision of those in high office, but because we, the people, have remained faithful to the ideals of our forebears and true to our founding documents. So it has been, so it must be with this generation of Americans. Anyone want to give that to me? Yeah. Obama. That was his inauguration speech. What do these orations have in common? Yes, so they address their audience, right? They address their audience in what is called an exordium. It is an opening statement that captures the audience's attention, addresses them as their target audience, and then tries to persuade them about something. What else do they have in common?
First person.
They're in the first person, so they are speaking from a position of authority, but in the first person, so they use the I, personal pronoun. There's a kind of declaration of authority, right, that they're saying, they're invoking the ethos, strategy of persuasion. They're saying that I have credibility, I'm the authority on this matter, and I will speak on this particular topic. So, in its most basic form, all good speeches, arguments, and essays announce their topics, they capture their audience's attention, and they draw upon the audience's pathos, ethos, or logos. These three persuasive strategies to make their audience side with their point of view. The same formula that we use when we open our essay. We are, in our essays, developing critical thought and effective communication. These are foundational cores of a liberal education, which is what you are receiving at Bishop's. They're actually skills that are transferable into every aspect of your life. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of the relevance of essay writing in the real world. But I was reading an interview from a CEO of a major financial firm, and he was being interviewed right after the financial crisis. And the interviewer was asking this CEO, what advice can you give with the increasing pressure of the job market to applicants to work for your firm? Do they need to have an MBA? Should they have a specialization in marketing or finance? What do they need to do to get a job? And the CEO said, I would rather hire somebody who knows how to do a close reading of Chaucer than somebody who can read an Excel document, because it demonstrates that they have critical thinking, they have information fluency, and they have oral and written communication skills. He said, I can teach everybody else the basics of finance. I can't teach people to think autonomously and independently. So he would prefer an English major. So, essay writing is not some dusty, arcane exercise one must suffer through to pass a course. There are skills of argumentation that if you can conquer those, you can conquer the world. I'm going to look at three things. I'm going to first introduce the 5 parts of rhetoric, and then I'm going to focus on one of those parts of rhetoric in detail, called disposition, which just means how to structure your argument or essay. And then finally, I'll talk about key concepts, things that you really need to pay attention to as you're writing your essay. Okay, so the 5 parts of rhetoric are thousands of years old. Marcus Tullius Cicero wrote De Oratore, or About Oratory, in 55 BC. And he sketched out the ideal portrait of an orator, what the orator needed to keep in mind in order to make the most persuasive argument. Cicero provides us with these rules that are the building blocks of every famous oration, article, and essay that has come since 55 BC. If you go back and look at YouTube and you see Obama's most famous speeches, his inauguration speeches, his speeches on the campaign trail, you can actually go and see the components of the classical argument that Cicero outlined over 2,000 years ago. It is a fascinating exercise. So, the 5 parts of rhetoric. The first one is invention. It is how you come up with the idea, who your audience is, what kind of evidence you use to persuade your readers. It is the brainstorming and the work you do in order to put together your essay. The second one is disposition. It is the structure. There are 7 parts of a perfectly structured essay, and we'll look at that a little bit later. The third, fourth, and fifth, style, memory, and delivery, are designed for performance. They're designed for somebody who is standing up in front of a group of people. So the style, how do you ornament your language? Memory, how do you memorize your speech so it doesn't seem like you're really boring? And then delivery, what kind of performance elements are you going to add to your speech? Are you going to gesticulate grandly? Are you going to be calm and quiet? Those are all styles of delivery. We're only going to focus on the first two because they're the only ones that are prevalent in a written essay form. But invention is really important. You have to understand who your audience is, who you are directing your argument to. Now, for university essays, your argument will always be directed towards your professor. You can make a few assumptions about this kind of target audience. You can assume that your professor is the expert in the field that you are discussing. So therefore, your professor has read all of the primary texts and much of the secondary sources, so there's no need to create plot summary. Often, high school and CEGEP teachers will tell you to write an essay so that anybody off the street could be able to read it and understand it. That is not the case of a university essay. You can assume a kind of knowledge in the delivery of your argument. What kind of information do you require to provide evidence? How do you back up your claims? How do you substantiate your thesis? And depending on the discipline, evidence changes. So if you're taking a biology course, you will be using statistics, you will be using lab results, you will be using all sorts of things that I don't understand as a humanities professor. In English literature, you will be using evidence from primary texts. If you're talking about Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, you will be using quotations directly from the text to back up your claims. Now, if you are in the upper year of a seminar, and you're expected to write a research paper, the evidence changes. Not only are you using primary texts, but you're also using secondary sources. And these are experts in the field that are discussing your topic. Your audience, your professor, will give you very clear expectations. Only use primary sources, or use at least 5 secondary sources. Depending on those expectations, that will determine the kind of information and evidence you use to back up your claims. The presentation of your essay is important. You have to consider the length of the assignment. So if your professor asks you for 3 to 5 pages, do not give them 20 pages. Give them 3 to 5 pages. If they ask you for a research essay that is 8 to 10 pages, don't give them 5 pages. So understand the presentation. Also, be very cognizant of the language that you use in essays. You are supposed to use formal language. Therefore, there is no colloquialisms. What's colloquial mean?
Terms that we all use, like something that we all know, but it's not really like for sure.
Slang. So familiar language, language that is conversational, but doesn't have the high formal diction of an essay genre. You'll also want to avoid contractions. Contractions are not part of the delivery of a formal essay. So by doing a lot of research and thinking about your topic and brainstorming in a kind of free writing style, you are actually participating in invention, the first part of rhetoric. And I highly recommend that even if you're not entirely sure what your argument is when you set out on this journey of essay writing, that you don't worry too much about that. You do a kind of free writing exercise. You put everything that you're thinking onto the page. You can always go back later and revise it and structure it. Some people really rely on an outline, a very careful, detailed outline before they begin the writing process. That is okay, but sometimes the outline limits you. Sometimes when you're in the middle of writing this essay, you come up with a light bulb moment. So give yourself the flexibility to be able to change paths. And that requires you to write your essay in advance, to free write, and to not confine yourself to a kind of essay outline that you cannot change as you go. If you already know what you're going to argue before you start, it makes for an okay essay, but it doesn't make for a brilliant essay. So don't contain yourself.